I think being enlightened is seeing the equality everywhere. And got to be aware of as you start to gain, really fully experience your inner wisdom, there is the danger that that can manifest into a spiritual egoic self, which is
Right.
probably worse than the regular egoic self because it sees itself as being a higher, more evolved being.
Welcome. This is Mr. Jazzy. Today we have the honor of sitting down with the legendary Guru Ganesha Singh, a true icon of the yoga music genre. In our conversation, we delve into the raw and beautiful pulse of life that runs through his music, touching upon the fragility of life, love, and eternal search of meaning. What is unique about this episode is that Guru Ganesha shares his personal experiences with Yogi Bhajan, shedding light on the challenging subject of the sexual abuse scandal surrounding the organization Yogi Bhajan started. Additionally, his unique perspective on the concept of a guru, diving into the realm of spirituality and exploring the profound wisdom that arises from facing our ego with love and acceptance. Join us as we embark on this enlightening exploration with Guru Ganesha, a cherished friend, a guiding light, and a spiritual uncle whose wisdom and presence have touched countless lives, including my own. Guru Ganesha, again, thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor. And
It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to be with you, Gyatso.
thank you so much. Really, thank you so much. There are actually a lot of things I would like to cover today. And one thing that we talked about before that I cannot seem to forget about it, also a lot of my friends has been asking me about it, is that we're curious. People are always curious about the truth, right? So if you don't mind, I would like to ask you a few questions about Yogi Bhajan. Would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. So, would like to know that
No
what
subjects
would,
are off limits, Gyatso.
okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Would like to know that Guru Ganesha, what was your first experience with him?
Well, my first experience with Yogi Bhajan himself in person
Yes.
was in the late spring of 1972.
Right.
I had gone to a Kundalini yoga class taught by one of his students, a man named
Mhm.
Bhagwan Singh, a few months prior.
Right.
And he was coming to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst to give a lecture on meditation. And
Right.
I had done the yoga class and really liked it. Had a powerful experience. So I kind of wanted to meet the source. And I went to the meditation class. And want to hear a little story about the first time our eyes met? So,
Absolutely. Please.
you know, some in some of the universities, they have classrooms where the teacher is down at the bottom, and everybody else is sitting up in tiered seating, right? Like that.
Yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
sitting on one of the aisles. It's kind of some dome like building. Yogi Bhajan apparently came in through the back door, and he had three or four of his staff with them. And I kind of heard the door, and then I almost felt like an energy hit my back, and I turned to look up the aisle, and he was marching down with long robes on, with these beautiful assistants with him. And he stops when he sees me and looks down at me, and he says, "What took you so long?" And I was like kind of dumbfounded. And, here I was 21 years old, and kind of at a stage where I was looking for truth and looking for higher purpose, trying to understand why I was a being and why I was on this planet, you know. And 150 LSD trips had given me a little glimpse, but it didn't last long enough to where I could reconcile things. So that's when I met him. And that class was powerful for me because he was very funny. And my father was also a professional entertainer, comedian, very funny. He had
Right.
passed away about when I was 17, actually. And I had gone into a bit of a depression after my father had died. And it was the first time I had laughed from my belly since my dad had died. So there was kind of like, I almost looked at him almost immediately as a spiritual father.
Yes, absolutely. How did you feel in that moment when he said, "What took you so long?"
Well, I was a little shocked. You know,
Yeah.
I wasn't 100% certain about what he meant, but, certainly the combination of that, the yoga class I had taken prior, that I had a powerful experience uh, doing meditation with him that day and about 300 or 400 other people who were there. And, the message I was getting from within was this was the spiritual teacher that Vivekananda was talking about in his book, Raja Yoga, when he
Right.
said, when the consciousness is ready, that the teacher, kind of the spiritual guide, will appear in the physical plane of reality, you know? So whether he was or not, now I look back, I'm now no longer 110% sure like I was then,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
because of subsequent things that have happened. But at the time, I was pretty convinced this was the spiritual guide that the universe had manifested for me.
Right. Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing the story, Guru Ganesha. After that day, you took the meditation class. You mentioned there were like 400 people, right? And I remember in the previous podcast, you mentioned that then you said, "Take me with you."
Well,
So you went with,
yeah, that happened 2 months prior. The
okay.
gentleman who taught the class, Bhagwan Singh, and then he had another gentleman with him named Sat Pavan at the time. I think he later became Sat Ratan Singh, who was from Puerto Rico and was playing the Guru Ram Das chant. I
Right.
had gone with them. Afterwards, I asked them, I said, well, I don't know who you are, because I originally thought he was
Right.
Yogi Bhajan, Bhagwan Singh. And
Right.
I don't know who you are, where you come from, but take me with you. And they laughed and they took me. And
Right.
I ended up staying at that ashram for the weekend because
Right.
when I arrived there, it was like a Thursday night. They told me they were just starting a weekend retreat. There must have been 50, 60 people there, which was kind of serendipity. You know, I go to a yoga
Yeah.
class. So I stayed for the weekend, had continued to have powerful, beautiful experience.
Right.
And subsequently, when I got back to college, I was going to Clark University in Worcester, Mass.
Yep.
I ran into somebody else who was a student of Yogi Bhajan at Clark University. I had
Okay.
never met him before. And he had a
Right.
poster up, classes in Kundalini yoga. So it was through them. His name was Guru Jeet Singh. It
Hmm.
was through him, and he had one other gentleman living. It was an ashram of just two young gentlemen who were going to the university,
Right.
but they were doing 6 hours of yoga a day. And
Yeah.
but they told me about Yogi Bhajan. They had a picture of him on their altar where they did their yoga and meditation, and they were the ones who told me that he was going to be at the University of Mass, which wasn't that far from a couple hours from where I was going to college in Worcester. And because I was interested in meeting him. Everybody that I met that was associated with him, they were very mystical people, very different than the people and the mainstream people I was meeting in college, and.
Absolutely. Guru Ganesha. So this ashram you mentioned are all these Yogi Bhajan's ashrams?
Well, the two ashrams that I've discussed so far were both Yogi Bhajan ashrams. Yeah. One
Right.
is, it was close the organization he named it 3HO, which
Right.
meant Healthy, Happy, Holy
Holy,
Organization.
right. Yes,
And
absolutely.
so they were like 3HO ashrams. One in
Okay.
Montague, Mass, where I went for the retreat. That was not too far from where I took my first yoga class. And then the other ashram was back in Worcester, Mass, kind of very close to the Clark University campus where I was attending. So it was very serendipity. Yeah. It was almost like it was designed by, life itself.
Yes. From my research, I realized that Yogi Bhajan, he came to America around 50s, and then by
Set
ar-
1969.
okay, 1969. So which means that when you met him, he came to America just only a few years.
Few years prior, he had
Right.
was in Toronto, then he
Right.
went in Canada, then he went to Vancouver in Canada, then he
Right.
went down to LA because he was noticing there was tremendous receptivity amongst the Woodstock Nation. My
Yes.
generation were just kind of reaching adulthood.
Right.
We were very interested in Eastern metaphysical stuff. It's kind of the natural evolution from hippiedom. And
Absolutely.
and we were experimenting with lots of consciousness changing drugs,
Right.
but it was really a quest for meaning, for purpose.
Absolutely. And I really think that the quest for meaningful purpose is our eternal quest. We always want to. I believe every single person, whether it's during the 70s or now in 2023 or in 2033 or in later on in the age of AI, I think we all deep down want to know that's why we're here, what we are meant to do, and what is our purpose. Right.
Exactly. At what age do you remember first starting to think about, how did I get inside this physical body? And who am I? And do I have a purpose? Is this all random? Was this organized by some super intelligence? When did you first start thinking about this?
I think around 15 or 16, I remember that it was also very interesting. I came across this blog, and this gentleman, he studied abroad and then he came back. He wrote this long article about essentially write down 100 things, more or less, 100 things that you thought you would like to do for the rest of your life until you find that one thing that you start crying, which is very interesting.
Oh,
I,
beautiful,
I did
beautiful.
that. Thank you. I did that exercise, but I didn't cry at all. And I believe I did that two, three times. And I remember so interesting. Like, and then my grandpa would came into my room, and I would like super. I was super into this. I was like, oh, please don't bother me. Let me finish my exercise. And now look back, the things that are super important to me are in front of my eyes all along, which is people and family, and especially connecting with people. And I think that's really also, yeah, because I just got back from a trip from I went home for 2.5 weeks, and it's really, after 3.5 years, this is really exactly what I needed, and it's feeling so amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's a beautiful story.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
what kind of relationship did you have with your grandfather?
My grandfather, so when I was growing up, both my mom and my dad, they were quite busy working, and he always picked me up and dropped me. he always at least pick me up from school. A lot of times he dropped me off at school too. And with he would be riding the bicycle because we live super close to the school, to my elementary school. And sometimes I will forget my homework, and then he will ride his bicycle to school and drop it off for me. And he always take me out for a walk because my parents will be tired after work. And I remember the yogurt that we used to drink when I was a kid. It's this little plastic packaging outside, and inside there's like four little. It's this, yeah. It's like it's not the yogurt nowadays. It's like in a box, but they're in the like a plastic packaging. They're like flat, and there are four of them. And I remember the pineapple flavor and what else flavor. And I remember that we would go buy a pack, and that will cost, I don't know, like 10 cents or something, or 50 cents for that pack of four. And then we will go for a walk, and I will drink that with him in the summer nights of Beijing. And it's really beautiful. He actually reminds me of you because when I tell my friends about my grandpa, that I tell them that he's a saint because he's always so chill and he doesn't really need anything, and he's always smiling and just doing his things. Go to the park, walk the dog, watch some TV, and some other healthy habits. So
So
yeah,
it sounds like he was a guiding light for you, and he had a beautiful relationship with life,
absolutely,
and he
absolutely,
felt it was a gift of life, and it was precious.
absolutely, totally, totally. And yes, it's really from him and from my parents as well. I taste this unconditional love, and going back home to reconnect with that is really just absolutely amazing. So I'm super happy, and
I can see where your good nature came from.
thank you so
Yeah,
much,
you
Guru Ganesha.
have an optimistic outlook, right, on life.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so, which is one of the reasons that we're doing this podcast today, because I'm super determined to create the most meaningful content possible within my power, and hopefully one day the most meaningful content out there on the internet. And yes, so
So at the foundation of everything is this gift called life, and it is given to us on a moment by moment basis via the breath.
right,
So it's the quickest way to reconnect connect with your essence, is to
yes,
just kind of feel gratitude for the actual gift of being alive. And, you know, and I'm realizing that it's may not be as complicated as I thought it was for
yeah,
so many
absolutely,
decades.
yeah, absolutely. Guru Ganesha, so come back to the story, right? You took that
Yes, yes.
you, amazing. You took the meditation class. Did you go with Yogi Bhajan right there and then, or
No, no, I ended up moving into the Worcester ashram soon thereafter. And he was based in Los Angeles, but he traveled a
right,
lot.
right,
And
right?
it was then the ashram in Worcester became three single men who were really dedicated to the practice of yoga. Because I loved
Absolutely.
yoga. I just right away upon taking that first yoga class, I felt like it was something that I was destined to have, was to
Yes.
be a yogi. And
Yes.
be a yogi is just someone who's committed to the union of mind, body, and spirit, bringing them into alignment. And
Yeah.
which in large part is just kind of accepting life and yourself
Right.
the way you are,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
realizing you're a miracle to begin with. You're not broken. In fact, you're way
Yes.
more perfect than you even realize.
Right.
But sometimes the
Absolutely.
mind conjures up all sorts of,
Yeah.
thoughts that,
Absolutely.
that brings sadness. Although it's good to experience all the range of emotions, but I think we're here to really enjoy the experience of being alive.
Yes. Right, Guru Ganesh. So it sounded like you, how do I say, you didn't quite get sucked in by Yogi Bhajan in that moment or ever, but you joined, where you went to live in the ashram because of the community.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Joe. My first reaction to Yogi Bhajan
Right,
was that he was very entertaining,
right,
and I liked the subject matter, of
right,
the spirit, because
right.
everything else in life was so materialistic and focused on
Yes,
mind, body, and I was fascinated with this concept that people call God. So I wanted to know more about it. And sometimes, I don't know why, people, older people, sometimes men with white beards, seem to be, people tend to believe that maybe they have some insight into the whole condition. I'm not
yes,
sure I have any more access to the wisdom of the ages than a younger man like you or anyone, you know.
right.
But
Yeah,
I think us older folks have generally have maybe more stories to tell, and people love
right.
stories.
Yes,
Hearing stories helps to make sense of it all.
right. Yes,
But yeah,
absolutely. Because
I would say no. For the longest time, I thought he was my spiritual teacher, and I didn't realize that the true spiritual teacher was already fully present inside me. So I was still looking kind of outside me. And at the same time, the what he was sharing with us were really timeless. Pranayama, hatha yoga, yoga postures, Kundalini yoga with a little more strenuous, but still use the same basic asanas that are used in hatha yoga, but
right,
was more calisthenic. It was good for us hippies who had been taking a lot of LSD. We needed a more intense experience than you would get from hatha yoga. I
right.
don't know really, honestly, what his intentions were. At the time, I thought his intentions were pure, that he was there just to, serve the students and help us achieve a level of consciousness that he achieved. Now looking back on all the secrets that I learned, that were things that were happening behind closed doors, naturally I started to question, well, were the intentions as pure as I thought they were?
Yes,
And but he served his purpose in my life, which I'm grateful for. I'm not grateful for some of the a lot. I'm not grateful for any of the harm that he caused,
right.
but he
Absolutely.
he tried very hard to keep all of that secret.
That's what I heard. Guru Ganesha, have you ever had doubts when you were around him? Or
Sure. I mean, I'm a human being, and I used to, as a young man, I was like astounded that he had so many beautiful women surrounding him all the time, and
right? And
I
those
guess,
women, and those women, they were traveling with him all the time, right? Ever since
well,
the
not all of
70s when
them.
you met
Yeah,
him.
he always had an entourage of women traveling with him, and you know, it was a little incongruous to what we were being taught.
Absolutely.
But in a way, if you read about Gandhi's life too, he used to test himself by surrounding himself with beautiful women. So
Fair
what
enough.
did I know? What did I know? He's testing himself, but as a young man with a lot of testosterone, and so forth, I think in a way my egoic self was saying, "Well, gee, I could do that too. Maybe I'll become a great yoga teacher and be surrounded by all these beautiful women."
Yeah.
And so I think that was kind of when I look back. that was kind of a draw. You know, he had Rolls Royces, he had the finest clothes, jewelry. Everybody around him had all these magnificent jewels. So yeah, I think all of that Maya was
Right.
was attracting us to a certain extent. But more than anything, the fact that he spoke with such conviction at a time in my life where I was, really confused. I had about 150 very up and down experiences with psychedelics, and uh, which I think maybe I would have been better off with two or three instead of 150. But I had gotten myself I was very confused, and when I met Yogi Ji. And
Right.
all of a sudden, there was this clear path because, he basically had a prescription for every aspect of life, starting with what to use to brush your teeth,
Right.
exactly what to do upon waking in the morning. And
Right.
so, in a way, that certainty was also attractive to us. Now,
Yes.
I don't trust people who speak with utter certainty about everything,
Yes.
because I think one should take a step back when a human is speaking with utter certainty about like the afterlife and so forth. I suggest being a little cautious. Don't
Yes.
instantly,
Totally.
because
I
someone looks good, speaks with charisma. I wouldn't instantly assume that he knows better than you.
right.
Say what?
Because I have run into sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, you come fully equipped, and the whole experience of it helped me, and I think we talked about this before. I think it's in the Tao. It says when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive. And then when the
Yes.
student is truly ready, the teacher will disappear. That's kind of
Right.
what's happened for me.
Right.
In that I had to disembrace Yogi Bhajan as my spiritual guide because, at least in my limited mind, I feel like if you're really putting yourself out there as a teacher and teaching the art of life, that and if you're really uh, uh, laying out guiding principles that you're telling people to live by, or they're going to come back as a crawling creature, starting the evolutionary cycle from the beginning and having to live 108 million lifetimes again. I
Right.
think it's a good policy to practice what you preach,
Yes.
and there have
Because I
been,
heard that he claimed that he was that word called celibacy, but
right.
obviously now
I
we knew
mean,
that.
even in the Sikh path, the teachings are to be celibate until you're married,
Yeah, celibate.
and then to practice fidelity. I
Yeah.
think I'd have more respect for him overall than I do now because the respect went from 100
Yes.
quite low after I started to hear about what had happened to so many of my sisters and daughters in the community.
Right. When did you first hear about these incidents?
Well, there were rumors that were, from really back into the 80s. I started hearing some rumors, but at the time we were, I just didn't, I was so deeply entrenched in my conviction that he was a man of God that it was like, no way. And he had even told us there would be people slandering him, that this always happens to every man or woman of God. They end up being slandered, and this said. So he, I think,
Did he compare himself with Christ?
on occasion, yes, on
Right, right.
occasion,
Because Christ was crucified, but on the cross, right? So
right. So
that's what I
it's
was.
it's
Yeah,
a very compelling story. And then when it started
absolutely.
happening, one or two women here and there would, he was hit with some lawsuits in the 80s by
Okay.
executive secretary,
Right.
who wrote a book. Her name's Pamela. I can't remember her last name, but she wrote a book that came out in January of 2000. It kind of blew the lid off the community. She
Right.
was his, second in command of the organization for,
Absolutely.
from
Some
about
some claim even that she helped build the cult, right?
did. I think she would agree to that she helped build it,
She said during interview she said yes, but she wasn't aware of that in the moment, right? If thinking in her shoes, I guess I would understand, right? Because she was very busy doing a lot of responsibility, and also that apparently Yogi Bhajan gave her a ring to promise her that they have exclusive relationship, right? So it's both
She was
the
special.
devotion and the love, right? So
Yeah, men have been bullshitting women for centuries, so this was another example. As the stories came out, he made each and every one feel very special
right,
and promised them, all sorts of things like you're going to be the next master of white tantric, or you're going to be secretary general of the organization. It was an elaborate, very effective way to silence women. And,
right,
but after a while, they started to discover each other, that they weren't exclusive, that,
yes,
you know, I think he told her she was his spiritual wife from past lives, yada, yada, yada.
yes,
In any
yes,
event, it was disappointing, you know, to uh,
right.
to learn of the. I don't know. I don't want to walk on eggshells around it. It was quite the hypocrisy of epic proportion.
Right. When did that happen, Guru Ganesha? You said you used to
Well, that
look
was
up
in
to him.
the 80s. There were some lawsuits that none of us believed, and that he bought that. He paid them off and told us a different story. And uh, then again, and maybe late 90s, I heard a few rumors. Once again, I have to say, on a certain level, I wasn't quite ready to accept that there was any truth to these. And plus, I was living, as part of the Washington, D.C. community. Uh,
Right.
versus the folks who were in New Mexico or LA were closer to it. So there were more and more people that were starting to believe it. Numbers of people left the organization, from literally from the time of the beginning all the way up through now. People left
Yes.
when they started to believe that there was, a lot of hypocrisy going on.
Right. Did you hear about the schools that he opened four schools in India around 80s?
Well, yeah. In fact, my son went to Guru Nanak Fifth Centenary, the first school that he opened when he was 8 years old. He went there for a year. He actually liked it. My first wife divorced me because she didn't want our son going to that school, and she found out that if we were divorced, that I couldn't send him to the school in India without both of
Right.
them agreeing to
Right.
it, you know.
Right.
But I
So
think she was more concerned about it and did more due diligence. Sometimes mothers are better than fathers at this stuff. I just,
absolutely, I
I
think
just had
in the case.
accepted in total faith that this school was the best possible thing for our children.
A lot of people did believe that. I heard for a fact that people would send their kids away when they were 2 years old, and they would came back that not recognizing
Well,
their
I mean,
parents.
that maybe there was one or two of those instances. It was more like 6, 7, 8, where the
Yeah.
kids would start to go. And
Yes.
it did affect the relationship the parents had. They weren't seeing their children that much. He also was encouraging kind of child swapping, to the extent that you'd have a child whose parents were in Florida, for example, live with a
Yeah.
couple in Virginia near us, or things like that. He was kind of advising against that kind of mother, father, child emotional attachment. I no
Right.
longer agree with that. I was just taking everything in,
Yes.
with blind
Maybe
faith.
that was his plan of to for parents and kids to be disattached, so that if something happened to the children, they wouldn't tell their parents. And that's
Well, there are, a number of people in the community that, now believe that that could have been the case. And also there's reports of, money being skimmed from the parents' tuition to
right.
a couple of his sons, you know, and,
Right.
and I don't really want to talk too much about that. But,
Right.
Pamela in her book talked about that the school was being used as another source of profit, of money.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still drink yogi tea nowadays, but I heard yogi tea was doing $1 billion revenue already in the 80s or in the 90s.
I don't know if it ever
Right.
got to $1 billion, but it was hundreds of millions. But
Right.
I
Absolutely.
don't think that happened back in the 80s. That's happened closer to, the turn of the century and since the turn of the century.
Right. Right. Yes. It was a documentary from Vice, and then they interviewed really a lot of people, and so the
And
documentary
that
was
was funny.
mentioning.
That was the one episode. There's a documentary coming out from HBO called Breath of Fire. That's a docu-series, going to be a six-parter on 3HO, Sikh Dharma in the West, Yogi Bhajan.
Oh,
Yeah. No,
okay.
no, I
Did
definitely
it
realized that
did they interview you, Guru Ganesha? The
no,
HBO
they didn't
interview you?
interview. I mean, if they asked, I would be fine being interviewed, but
Okay. Okay. Well, HBO is missing out. So
there's a lot of interesting people in the community. I mean, the vast majority of people who got involved were sincere seekers,
right.
But,
Absolutely. And I think
there were numerous teachers that came from, the East, India, so forth, Nepal, who developed spiritual communities in the West, mostly in U.S., Canada. I mean, some of these were very, uh, exemplary teachers who were, shall we say, practicing what they preached. But a number of
right.
them were also maybe they just got drunk with the power that they had over. I mean, I got to say, those of us in the West were used to, putting celebrities, musicians, everybody up on pedestals. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, even the Beatles, we were influenced by the Beatles going to India. And, for a while, George
Yes.
Harrison had Maharishi Mahesh Yogi up on this huge pedestal. I think it probably was quite shocking for some of these yogis and teachers, or whether they're yogis or bogey yogis. You know, I leave that for the universe to determine. But
Right.
there were, in retrospect, there was a lot of hanky panky going on. There's my wife and I just watched this amazing documentary on Amazon Prime called Source Family. The
Source family.
the Source family was now. This is a gentleman who was also considered Yogi Bhajan to be his teacher, but he
Right.
started his own spiritual community. Opened up a vegetarian restaurant in LA, and this is right around when Yogi Ji got to LA. And
Okay.
but it's a fascinating documentary that presents both. I think a very neutral view of the whole thing, the positives and the negatives. Very similar to our organization because a lot of the
Right.
guiding principles that this guy, whose name originally was Jim Baker, but he took on the name Father Yod, Y-O-D. And I mean, he basically taught his students, he called them his family, that he was God. He was the reincarnation of God. But it was a very, they got up early. They did 2-3 hours of spiritual practice every day. They all worked together. I mean, it was a very intoxicating lifestyle. There was a lot of love flowing too. But as you said earlier, I think the main thing that ripped open my heart, in addition to the music, was the congregation. There were literally, it was hundreds of thousands of us in our early 20s,
Right.
many of whom had been, from had either attended Woodstock or kind of part of that whole rebellion that a lot of
Right.
Westerners were going through around the time of the Vietnam War and so forth. But yeah,
Yes.
I look back some of the most beautiful times of my life were in the early 70s when I was living in an ashram in DC with well over 100 people in a few small townhouses. I mean, we were living 40, 50 people in a 2, 3 story townhouse with
Right.
4 or 5 bedrooms.
Wow. It was really the spiritual fraternity lifestyle, huh?
Yeah, in a way, I'm grateful that I went through that because it makes it easy when you're in a situation where all of a sudden there's a lot of people and you don't have your normal creature comforts. You just cruise through it because you've been there before.
Right. Absolutely.
And like right now, my wife and I, we're empty nesters, but we have a lot of people come and stay with us, and
Nice.
we love it either
Nice.
way.
Nice. Right.
But yeah, so you got fascinated by the story of Yogi Bhajan and did some research, huh?
Yeah, because some of my friends in my inner circle, they listen to our podcast and then they have a lot of questions. And mainly because one of my dear friends that I took him to a class at Rama Yoga Studio in Los Angeles.
You did, uh-huh.
Yes, so we took the class together with Tej. That night,
No catch.
Guru.
Well,
Yes. Oh, you did. You do.
oh
Nice.
yes,
Awesome.
she's been part of the organization almost as long as I have been.
Yes. Absolutely. So, and then we went to a class together, and also I just genuinely always enjoyed class of Tej, and then my friend asked me all these questions, so I got more interested in, and I want to, find the answer for myself and also for him, because I can totally understand. I can only imagine that if, let's say, I used to love somebody so much, then I realize he or she wasn't close to what I have imagined, and that must be devastating, and that must be heartbroken, right? And that can also make sense to, nowadays some people in the community or some people, as we see in the documentary, they absolutely just deny the facts,
Yeah,
right?
I think uh, my understanding is most of the leadership at Rama are don't believe any of this stuff happened. So
Right.
I think it would be good to get the whole picture, talk to some people who don't believe any of this happened too,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and then yeah, then feel what resonates for you. But in a way, at
Absolutely.
this point, he's been gone since 2004. May his soul rest
Yes.
in peace. And
Indeed. Rest in peace.
yeah, I mean, we're all human beings. I mean, if the stories are all true, then there was a part of him that must have been deeply hurt when he was growing up. Because I think it's kind of you have to learn this kind of stuff somewhere to be,
Right.
and it wasn't like these were loving relationships. Uh,
Yes.
Most of the women, if you read the stories, that didn't feel like there was any love being transmitted when he was having sex with them. Because you could step back and say, well, they were all consensual. No, turns out they weren't consensual.
Right.
And so he's kind of caused everything to be questioned by his own actions.
Yes.
Because naturally, if you're a student and you're looking to him as a spiritual teacher, and he taught you all this stuff that you applied to your life that worked and helped you have a good life, and then you hear all
Yeah.
of this stuff, it's
Yeah.
only and if it resonates for you, I mean, I talked to a number of these women one on one because they're like, daughters of the community and they trust me and they called me They weren't even ready to talk to, a group about it, but
Right.
they wanted to share with a handful of people that they thought would be fully present for them. And I believed these daughters of our community, and it was very painful for them to even share these experiences because they've been holding them in for so long. One of the young ladies who's very respected in our community, in her 40s now, but second gen, said she didn't want to tell anybody what happened to her because she thought it would cause people to lose faith in 3HO, in the community.
Right.
That they would believe her. Most of the women were like, "Well, I tried telling somebody, but nobody would believe me." She was different. She said she knew people would believe her because of her standing in the community. So she didn't want to, be the one responsible for shaking up people's faith because it did shake up the faith of a lot of people.
Absolutely. So sometimes I guess it comes down to how did that person feel what is the right thing to do in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were so many,
Right.
over 3 dozen women who've come out and shared
Yes.
stories that they were sexually abused at different, oftentimes when they had just turned 18 or they were still virgin. In any event, I'm a believer that I'm not a believer in secrecy. And I
Right.
think, especially in an institution or an organization, the more transparency, the better, And
Right.
so I would, advise young people if they're looking to have some, a mentor, spiritual mentor, spiritual guide, do the due diligence, and
Right.
be wary of organizations where one person is up on a pedestal and everybody considers every word out of that person's mouth to be it's got to be a absolute truth.
Yes. Really quick, Guru Ganesha, did you believe that you would get enlightened at that time by being around him? Or
I first off, I believe that we're all enlightened to begin with.
yes.
We've
Yes.
just been convinced that we're not. I mean,
Yes.
take a look at a 3 or 4 year child if they're allowed to just really be themselves, obviously with boundaries. And I mean, they're in such joy, and when you really understand, or I think at least my belief is when you really start to understand the gift of life, there's a lot of joy in your life, not just pain, not just depression, sadness. I mean, those are all important things to feel. But, you know, are you getting having a lot of just pure joy in your life? And I think if not, we have to step back and look at it. What have the beliefs that have been planted in our psyche by the culture, by the society, by our parents, by our teachers? You know,
Right.
I,
Yes.
are they helping you be more peaceful and more joy filled and more loving and more present for others? Or are they causing you to be afraid and paranoid? There's so much fear now that,
Indeed.
you know, and
Yeah.
I
Guru Ganesha asked that question because for the longest time, I don't know if you can see it at the back. There's like I have autobiography of the yogi here. Like,
yeah,
oh, it's over here.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, oh, right. I read that book back in
Yeah.
'68.
Right. So because again hear about all these stories from Rondas and the stories from the book, right? I The reason I asked the question is because if I were be meeting a guru or I would believe someone is my guru, then I would totally be thinking about, oh my god, if I could be around this person, I would just get enlightened. So that's the reason I ask the question.
I mean, that's kind of a lot of us how we felt. and
Right.
it's not just those of us who were kind of following Yogi Bhajan around, but, there are a lot of teachers in that era, Maharishi
Right.
Mahesh Yogi, Swami Satchidananda,
Right.
Muktananda, you know, and I think it's natural, especially if you're around somebody and you start having feelings uh, of the heart opening up, and you've never
Right.
experienced when the heart chakra opens up, which can cause these, just tears of bliss to pour out of you, not sadness. The natural inclination is to immediately like, it's this teacher, it's these people, it's this mantra that's caused that. So I need more and more and more of it. But I think
Right.
it's a good idea to realize it's all coming from inside you. It's
Right.
the feeling that you fell in love with that is not being caused by anybody else. It's happened in you.
Right. That's what I believe too. Is that when you fall in love with somebody, it's not only that person, but the person. I'm not sure if this makes sense, but the person is like the key or the keyhole, and or the person is the key, right? And you're the keyhole. The key opens you up for the capacity of love, and
Yeah, yeah. There's something about the energy, the alchemy of the
right,
your energy with that other person's energy that awakens something and opened up something that's already inside you. You know.
right,
So what we do though is we immediately think, let me hold on to that
yes,
instead of tuning into, okay, what is it about what is the underlies the energy of the underneath the personalities and the
right.
look and the face and the body and so forth. What exactly was it that triggered this heart opening experience in me? And
Right.
I think we may be mistaken if we think it was the person.
Right.
Not
Yes.
100% sure. I mean, this is, I'm a little reluctant to be sure about anything anymore, except that I'm grateful for the next breath.
Wow, that's beautiful. Guru
I
Ganesha.
mean, I think, to me, some of the most inspiring teachings that I've ever been exposed to are about humility. And I think being enlightened is seeing the equality everywhere. And got to be aware of as you start to gain, really fully experience your inner wisdom, there is the danger that that can manifest into a spiritual egoic self, which is
Right.
probably worse than the regular egoic self because it sees itself as being a higher, more evolved being.
I totally agree. Ramdas called this the golden chain of righteousness, which I think it's so beautiful and perfect, this definition, right? But Guru Ganesh, I consider you are absolutely a humble person, beautifully humble. Would you consider Yogi Ji a humble person as well, or
Well, Yogi Ji was not a manifestation of the Guru Ram Dass energy that we read about, the stories. And, Guru Ram Dass was the spiritual leader of hundreds of thousands of Indians at his time. But he used to disguise himself as a regular person, go into the parts of Amritsar that no one would go into and take care of the people had leprosy and the quote
right,
untouchables and the castes. That's
right,
to me humility. I'm sure he did a lot of anonymous stuff, but he was also a shameless self promoter.
right?
So, I don't know. I'm a less attracted to these shameless self promoters than I used to be.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
and stories that you tell about yourself that kind of could in a young impressionable mind deliver the message that you're some super spiritual being.
Right.
I think my job from this point on is to just to those who want to interact with me is just to bow to them and acknowledge that they have as great of an inner knowing as I do, probably greater, because I think we're evolving and each generation is coming with more, more gifts.
Right.
So
Fair enough.
trust your inner knowing, and
Right.
I like how you're
Yes.
like, digging in and not taking
Oh,
everything at face value.
oh yeah. I would just super curious because I would, until maybe around the pandemic, I would be quite proud to tell people, oh, I practice Kundalini a lot. So now, although my depth of, how to say, disappointment obviously is not as huge as a lot of people in the community, but I'm just curious, right? Because when this video podcast is being out there on the internet, right, that's your generation, my generation, or maybe the younger generation, they will check it out. And then that's also one thing my friend said to me that really encouraged me to prepare these questions is that he said, this is history. This is the history of
Yeah, this is history. We have
American,
to
especially
harness
American spiritual community, right? It was huge. So,
and I'm not a proponent of turning a blind eye to history,
right.
and
Yeah.
whitewashing things. All right, yeah, there was the history of what happened out in the public domain, but there's a history now of what happened behind the scenes that has really, for some people, it's a shame. I mean, I've been practicing Kundalini yoga for over 50 years, not exactly the way he taught, because at a certain point, I started to create my own sets for me, just
Right.
my own inner knowing of what my body needs. And,
Right.
so uh, there's a fanatical approach to it, like, oh, you can only teach sets exactly the way Yogi Bhajan taught.
Yeah.
I have to, I have to admit that I haven't been doing it that way for, maybe 30 years. And there's a number of people in the community that, never felt like they had to do everything exactly the way he taught it. Trust your own inner knowing. I've taught a
Right.
lot of Kundalini yoga classes over the years. People claim they had a great experience, and I was just teaching what I do myself and not making any claims that I couldn't back up with science, which is nearly everything. So
Right.
the only claim I can make is my perception is doing this set on an ongoing basis has helped me with the following. I don't know if it's going to help you in that way. It may help you in different ways or may not help you at all. I mean, even Yogi Ji used to say, hey, don't just believe stuff, experience it. So for years, I just believed he was a saint. But then after fully experiencing the whole picture, I think if he was a saint, he was flawed to the extent
Right.
that it's a damn shame, because if the Kundalini yoga is as powerful and fantastic as he claimed and a lot of people claim, it's a little tainted now, like you say. There are going to be people who are going to explore, oh, let me learn more about Yogi Bhajan. Then they're going to read all this stuff and they're going to say, can I believe what he says about the yoga and the meditation?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
in other words, and if your career track is going to be spiritual teacher, practice what you preach so you don't taint your own teachings.
Right. True. How about his eyes? Because not only him, I heard a lot of yogis and spiritual teachers, when people look at their eyes are like very intense. So I'm curious about.
Well, they could be intense, or they could be your projection that their eyes are intense. I mean, he picked that Tradicum picture of himself because
Okay.
and it was pretty penetrating.
Right.
But I don't know. What is your when you look into his eyes in pictures? What does your soul tell you?
To be honest, I have not been looking at that picture for years. But I remember when the first time I was looking, I wasn't so sure. I was curious, but I wasn't so sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say my philosophy now is I don't look in anybody else's eyes to gain spiritual insight. I've got
Right.
my own inner wisdom. I look in my third eye
Absolutely.
and,
Absolutely.
slow everything down so I can hear what's being transmitted. But I feel I am grateful to the source energy, the universe, to
Yes.
deliver that kind of a channel at the time that he manifested in my life. Because I'm not sure I would have listened to somebody quiet and like a Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't think I was quite ready to,
Yes, you mentioned that.
it's kind of like, well, do you believe that the universe is one divine energy and do you believe it's a benevolent energy? Then I got to step back and say, well, thank you for delivering to me Yogi Bhajan when I needed him. And thank you for, for removing him. Not, obviously there's a lot of people who just still feel the same. I honor their right to feel that way.
Right. Yes. I guess for me, the bottom line question is that I'm quite confused that how did so many people so just believed in him so much, and it seemed that they would really sacrifice their time and work a lot and absolutely obeyed him, send their kids away to India and donate their money, donate their business
Ah,
to him. Like, the bottom line is why?
well, that is a great question. And a lot of us old timers that were with him for 50 plus years are still asking ourselves that same question. I would
Right.
say that he was very charismatic, very charismatic, and spoke to us with utter certainty about profound unknowns that we wanted to know. Things that made us afraid, like what happens when you die. And I also think, yeah, he was tapped into he had a lot of inner knowing, and he was tapped into, I think he had taken the time to study a lot of the yogic teachings and so forth. But the intentions clearly were muddied. I
Yes.
think we all want to, if you're going to embrace somebody as an intermediary between you and God, I would do some serious. First off, I recommend not doing that anymore. Secondly, I recommend if you really need to have an intermediary, a pope, a minister, do the due diligence and make sure they have been walking the talk. And if probably they made a mistake or two, like most humans, well, fine, and they acknowledged it and they showed humility and but Yogi Ji, this was 35 years of, there was no humility
Right.
there. For
Right.
whatever reason, he couldn't stop himself from doing this stuff. And he must have known that this would have been devastating to his legacy, devastating to his students, devastating to potential future students. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tried so hard to keep it absolutely secret.
Right.
And let me tell you, he worked very hard at keeping it secret. So why would somebody who's teaching you how to live your life hide such a huge portion of his life? Because he was afraid that what has happened would happen, preferably not while he was alive. Am I being
Yeah.
too hard on him, Giazzi?
I think you're being fair.
With my limited, you know, intellectual capacities, and I've been processing this for quite a while now. This is where I'm at the moment. It's a constantly kind of shifting canvas, though.
Because I can only imagine it must be so difficult if I would have given majority or spent majority part of my life to believed in somebody or believed in his teachings, right? And I could only imagine how I would feel, right? You mentioned Guru Ganesha, he gave you this name, right? Ganesha.
Yeah,
Or yes,
yeah, and I
yes.
love the name. So
It's
it's
absolutely beautiful name.
yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of beautiful things about our community, and
Right.
it's been it's boy, everybody has in the that's even been associated with yoga. I mean, there are folks who left the community in the '80s that are still to this day writing books, trying to process everything that happened to them. It really gets in there deep,
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes. It's
it caused a lot of growth when this happened. Because
right.
you have to go back in and re-examine all the beliefs, the guiding principles that you've been living by, and ask
Right.
yourself, well, do I really believe in this, or am I just doing this because Yogi Ji told me to do it?
Right.
And I had total, complete blind faith that he knew better. He knew what was better for me than I know myself.
Yes. Yes. So it sounded like charismatic and saying things in such conviction, and also he came to America around a good time, right? Because of hippie movement and Woodstock you
Yeah,
mentioned, right? And I would imagine in the 70s, majority, at least 50% or above of his followers and students are in their 20s, right?
yeah,
So,
yes. I mean, like Premko's a little older. Some of his real early students that he met in LA, 69, 70. But I'd say the vast majority of the first generation are in their late 60s, 70s, some in their early 80s. Like Krishna is 84 now.
right, right.
But yeah, I mean, hey, it was very humbling.
Yes,
Very humbling. I mean, here I am I've had these conversations on numerous podcasts, and my viewpoint is not popular with the people who think he never did any of this. Some of them have written me some pretty scandalous letters about what's going to happen to my soul.
yeah. I heard he would curse people that their soul go burn in hell if they told, well, like he would told women, threaten women that their soul will burn in hell if they tell this to other people.
Or they were going to be out and they were going to be prostitutes or this or that.
Right.
Not a pretty picture. And believe me, I've done a lot of due diligence around this, and it's been very
Yes.
painful for my wife too, and for I'd say 60 to 70% of the people who were still associated with 3HO believe the allegations.
Yes.
But the people that don't are very passionate, and
Absolutely.
they're very strong in their
Absolutely.
conviction. They're more organized. And I
Yes.
think what's going to
Yes.
happen is they're going to end up with 3HO. That's going to be their
Yes.
organization. And whether the rest of us stay in and start another organization, I don't think so. I think we'll just continue to live. A lot of us still are into the Sikh path. My wife and I
Yes.
still practice the Sikh path, although I consider myself more of a human being than a Sikh or any other identity.
Yes.
And
Right.
I'm at a part of my life where I think the less that the less people get into their little identities. I'm this, I'm this, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Jew, I'm a
Yes.
Sikh, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Muslim. You know what I mean? I think that in a way we're better off. I'm not as pro organized religion as I used to be,
Right.
even though I may look it. Mainly, I look like I still like wearing a turban and I still like having a beard.
Great look, by the way, looking fresh.
Well,
Yes.
I'm grateful to my friends who brought me a new kurta. I haven't had a new kurta maybe 20 years.
It's absolutely beautiful. So, yes. Guru Ganesha, did you and your wife meet in the ashram or
I've had two marriages. This
right?
one is going strong, and will be 36 years in August. But my the mother of my 45-year-old son and I
Right.
were married in 1976, and
Right.
then she decided to divorce me in around about 85, 86. At the
Right.
time, she told me she was divorcing three of us. I said, three of us? Really? Who are the other two? She said she was divorcing Yogi Bhajan,
Right.
Ganesha Singh, who was the head of our ashram in the DC area, and me.
Right. Right.
And it
Okay.
was kind of, uh, she was kind of frustrated because I wouldn't do anything unless the other two guys, Gurjot and Yogi Bhajan, signed off on it.
Yeah. So you met her in that ashram
Yeah, that's a
or
whole
no?
other. The story behind the marriages and the dissolution of the first marriage, that could be a whole other episode, man.
Right, because I heard 80% the marriage were 80% of marriages were how to say appointed,
Yeah, my first marriage was arranged.
arranged.
And
Yes,
I mean,
arranged.
obviously, I had a say in it, and I'm not going to blame it on anybody. And
Right.
because, if somebody felt strongly that they didn't want to marry who Yogi Ji suggested, all they had to do was
Yes.
say no. Yeah, he might
Okay.
persist a little bit, but he would back off too if people had a strong enough conviction in their own inner knowing.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
One time,
But
one
you didn't say no. You
well, actually, at the time, I was kind of like a top revenue generator for the DC ashram. As a
okay?
sales guy, we had and I was 26 years old. I've been in the ashram for 5 years. I've been celibate for 5 years. And I was in California. And,
Right.
California, boy, people are beautiful in California. So I called
Absolutely.
and said, you better marry me off or I may fall from my vow of celibacy. And uh, I was like, oh, man up, man up. Then I asked a buddy of mine who was the national sales manager of the company and reported up to the head of the ashram. And he said, "Oh, Ganesha, Larry is not marrying anybody these days. You better find your own wife." So I actually did find a woman in our community in Denver who was interested in, getting together with me. And I called Letty for his blessing. And he said, "Well, did you ask the head of the Denver ashram, a guy named Huddy Singh?" I said, "No, no, I just, He says, "Well, you better ask him." So I asked
Right.
him, and he said, "Well, have you asked the lady?" I said, "No, you guys have been telling me that you guys need to sign off on this." Said, "Well, she's teaching a class now. Call back at 8:30 Mountain Time, and I'll make sure to put her on the phone, and you can ask her yourself." So I'm chanting the Guru Ramdas, nervous about making this call. And right as it's 8:30, I'm reaching down to grab the phone,
Yeah.
and the phone rings in my hand. And I pick it up and I'm like, Satnam, because that's how we always greet at every call. And it was Letty, the head of the DC ashram, and said, "Ganesh." He never called me Guru Ganesh, it was always Ganesh. I said, "Letty." He said, "I found you a wife." I said, you found me a wife. I called you earlier in the day. I told you I found this lady. You said, call up Putty. He told me to wait. I've been just about to call. He said, found you a wife. Finally, I said, okay, who? And he said, I'm going to read you a list of 8 ladies, single ladies in the community. You can pick. I said, all right, well, read them all. There was this one lady I really wanted to marry in the community, and she wasn't on the list. So after we read the 8, these were all incredible ladies and so forth. But I asked him about this one particular lady who will go unnamed right now. And he said, oh, no, she's not. She's spoken for. I said, oh, I was disappointed. I said, well, Letty, with all due respect, I'm just going to go ahead with our earlier plan. I'm going to marry this lady from Denver. He was upset at me, hung up. Now I'm kind of mustering my courage to call her up. The phone rings again. It's Letty's wife, who was beloved in the community, Ganga, meaning the great divine river of life. And she said, Guru Ganesha, I have just the right person for you. And it was actually another woman that I barely knew that I remember I was impressed with, though. A, being a 21-year-old guy, I thought she was pretty. And B, when I was sent out on this sales trip for the Shakti shoes, I had no suitcase. And I asked the people in the ashram, anybody have a suitcase, like after sadhana one morning. She runs down into the basement, and there's this storage room with just tons of suitcases, and she's throwing them around. Finally gets to her suitcase, which was a beautiful suitcase, and just hands it to me and said, here, use my suitcase. And I was like, wow. I was just touched by her spirit of service. So I remembered that. And
Right.
the other thing I remembered was she got up before anybody else in the community. We were starting our morning prayer, Japji by Guru Nanak, at 3:45. She was down there in the sadhana room at 3:15 reading Guru Gobind Singh's prayer called Japsai, which is very powerful. And she had a beautiful voice. And every now and then I'd be showing up for, I was one of the early risers. I'd show up for sadhana, and she'd be in there doing this prayer. And I go, wow, that's so beautiful. And she's so devotional. So that's why I agreed to marry her. I don't know why she agreed to marry me, other than she was probably lonely, and she was actually in love with somebody else, I found out. So in any event, we had a 1 week engagement, and then we were married.
Right. But Guru Ganesha, what did you mean by it was arranged by Yogi Ji? So it wasn't arranged by Yogi Ji, but arranged by people within the
Yeah,
community, right?
there was the heads of the ashram. Oftentimes got the title Mukhya Singh Sahib, which means very high level minister. Even though in the actual Sikh religion, as it is in India, there aren't ministers really. But Yogi Ji wanted to have ministers, wanted to be looked upon for nonprofit purposes as a
Yeah,
real
yeah, yeah.
church. So,
Yeah.
so what was the question?
Oh, the question was that two questions. If your first marriage was arranged, and the
Well, it
second
was
one was
suggested. It was suggested.
suggest suggested. Yes, exactly. So
And
and
it wasn't like the normal way of
right.
courting,
Yes.
courtship, and even
Yeah. So it wasn't.
few
Yeah.
dates for in that week, but we had a chaperone. I was 26 years old, and so was she, but we had
Right.
chaperones.
Okay.
I know it's very.
Indeed. Indeed. That sounded like definitely like another episode for sure because it sounds so fascinating.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean it was quite a pole 180 degrees opposite of the way normal people were living their raised and living their life in the U.S.
Yes. Absolutely. I can only imagine. So, wow. I think overall, to wrap it up, this part of the conversation is that I think that Ramdas has said this that when other people do something, it's their karma, and how you react to their doing that becomes your karma.
Yeah, Yeah.
That's one aspect. And the other aspect is that when it comes to certain spiritual practice, in order for it to work, and we usually need to be totally immersed into that practice. And however, all practice should be the path towards God. And when we can reach that, or yeah, essentially, or when we can reach that, eventually we can let go the medium, whether the practice or a person or something else. That's how I felt towards yogi ji or kundalini yoga or with a lot of practices.
Yeah, I don't think that, myself, that people necessarily need a single spiritual teacher. I mean, if you think about it, there's 8 billion people on the planet. Everybody is teaching. Everybody, I've said this to you, everybody's my teacher now. Some people teach me what to do, some people teach me what not to do. People that teach me what not to do, or sometimes that's more valuable than the people that teach you what to do. But I would suggest to my own children and grandchildren that they just look for some mentoring, not one individual to make your master and you be
Right.
obedient. I think the best yoga teachers and teachers of meditation realize you're not their spiritual teacher. You're facilitating them to have an experience similar, maybe one you had, and then let them run with it. You know,
Yes.
do I need to collect students? No, I don't really have students. And I don't really want students. I'm just, if people somehow think that I may, be transmitting some wisdom, I'm going to just say, well, hey, you got your own inner knowing. Get in touch with that. That's going to be way more accurate GPS than any guidance I can. It's like
Absolutely.
you get a Lexus or you get a Tesla. They've all got
Yes.
built-in GPS. If you want to go somewhere, you just. I believe you're like that. You have a built-in GPS. We all do. But I'm not sure I want the Chevrolet GPS kind of that's outside of my vehicle. The big thing that's going on in our community now is we're
Right.
trying to learn how to disagree in a non-disagreeable way. But
Yes.
somehow this whole spiritual teacher thing is so important to people that that friendships are being tossed asunder because there's a whole spectrum of beliefs.
Right.
But I have tremendous respect for the hardcore Yogi Bhajan loyalists,
Right.
and I would love it if they would continue to respect me, but you know that's up to them.
Maybe in a way that is also teachings, right? Because that comes down to two different group of people that each believe that they are right, and then that comes down to ego, right? Because
Yeah.
ego always wants to be right,
What's more
and
important, to be right or to have a successful life? Or to be right and have a successful marriage? I mean, a lot of marriages crumble because there's a constant fight to be right.
right.
But yeah, I think that's a great teaching. Can we continue to love people even though their spiritual beliefs are going to be all over the map?
Yes, I think
I'm
it's super
trying to
important.
do that. It's harder within your own community if there's a split in a long-term community.
Right.
The demonization is actually more intense than the demonization for people from totally different groups.
Exactly. It's always easier, right? I think it started in Greek time that when when something happened within their tribe or their cities, they always like demonize an outsider, right? And then in this way they can unite within their city and within their tribe. And I mean, look at nowadays in America, and also look at nowadays in China, right? Nowadays in Russia, nowadays in Ukraine, in European Union, and but anyway, um, Guru Ganesha would like to ask you because I have this idea about Sanam Fast. What happened to it? Because I've been wanting so bad, so eagerly of going to one, and the last time I checked, the last time the Facebook group has the Facebook page have posted was 2020. And but by the way, I saw a beautiful live stream that you did. That you're playing music, you're interacting with the audience. But I want to know what happened to Sanam Fest.
Well, Satnam Fest is owned by Spirit Voyage Music,
Right,
Spirit Voyage Records, a company that I founded. I sold the majority of stock, nearly 90% of it to this magnificent young woman, Cotton. And
right,
she's the second generation in our community.
right,
And I think the division in our community has hit her hard as well. And she's still kind of, because the Satnam Fest was kind of like a Kundalini yoga music festival.
right,
So, and a lot of the musicians are still going through our second generation folks in our community, like Sanatam Kaur and Ajit and Jai
right,
Jagdish and Naranjan. And, I think Karan hasn't really fully landed as to whether she wants to continue with those music festivals. I hope she
right,
starts them back up. I totally respect her process, and she's been a
right,
huge supporter of the reporters of harm in the second generation. So my fingers are crossed. It's really not my decision anymore. I only own about 10% of the company,
right,
and which one of the smartest moves I ever made was selling 90% of the company to her
right,
because she's done a way better job. Now my 10% is worth way more than when I owned 100% of the company, right? Because
right,
she's a great entrepreneur with a heart. So we'll see. It may remanifest in a new form. By the way, I'm
right.
going to be, Sakatar and I are going to be starting to do a little more live music again come this fall. We're going to have a weekend celebrating my 73rd birthday in New York City
Wow.
on my birthday, September 24th. Right now, it looks like that Thursday night will be at Integral Yoga New York again for a concert there. And then we're going to do a couple of concerts in Connecticut.
Okay.
Details still being worked out in terms of venue, but probably it'll
Right.
get posted in the next 2, 3 weeks, all the details.
Right.
But it'll be fun to get out there and